everybody. So glad that you could join us this morning. More often than not, when I work with organizations to make their work visible, to improve the flow of their work through the value stream, people tell me a lot that they are overloaded, that the amount of requests coming their way is massive, and that the only way to meet that demand is by working long days, evenings, nights, weekends consistently. So what I hear is that people are drowning in front of their screens, and that attending all day back-to-back meetings don't help the situation much. So I think it's time to discuss and combat cognitive overload. And if you're overloaded, this session is for you. Because we're going to look at how to get our heads above water and create some headspace. We're going to consider how to protect your time and capacity, how to focus on the most important work, really how to combat this cognitive overload. One of the biggest complaints in modern society is being overscheduled, overcommitted, overextended, and asking people how they are. The stock reply is super busy, crazy busy, insanely busy. Nobody is just fine anymore. And that's why let's start talking about cognitive load by defining it. So cognitive load is the amount of working memory being used. So when something is new, when we're learning new things, which most knowledge workers do every day, that information has to be held in our working memory long enough in order for it to be processed sufficiently to pass into long-term memory. But our working memory's capacity is limited. So when too much information is presented at one time, the working memory becomes overwhelmed and we lose that information. We forget stuff. So if you think about how easy it is to forget someone's name that you were just introduced to 5 minutes ago, it's not unrealistic to understand why we forget where to find Google Docs on Google Drive or the wiki, let alone trying to remember passwords or new processes. So I think a good question is, how much can we fit in our head at one time? And how much work is too much? And that depends on our levels of stress. Because when we take on too much work in progress, we overload ourselves and we overload our teams. Sometimes we do this to ourselves. Like we pull in more work than we have capacity to do, and it's us who are unable to say no. It's like we'd rather work 70 hours a week than say no. So strong is our desire to provide value to others. And sometimes work gets pushed on us where people are told they can't say no. I was listening to a keynote at a conference last month, and the keynote speaker was with the Air Force, and he said there was one unit's culture where saying no wasn't allowed. It just anything related to, sorry, we can't get to that right now, or is that a priority one, or anything that hinted at not being able to meet that demand was unacceptable. So instead of them just saying, our current maintenance process doesn't meet the demand, they spent 3 months working with their director of process improvement to come up with an alternative way to communicate the problem. And the result, the problem statement was, this unit appreciates the opportunity to improve upon its already robust capabilities for maintenance. So how much stress interferes with the team's ability to deliver value? I mean, if it takes 3 months to wordsmith a WIP problem, what else could they have accomplished during that time if they weren't overloaded due to a push system versus a pull system? So reminder that a pull system is when teams are able to they're able to hold off starting new work until they have finished work. A push system is when teams start new work, new requests before existing work in progress finishes. Pull systems like Kanban pull work based on their capacity. So they're able to finish work before pulling a new request. Otherwise, the work just continues to grow. The demand outweighs the capacity, and overloaded teams, the more work in progress they take on, the more conflicting priorities, the more context switching, the more those things contribute to unmet business needs, which then spawns new initiatives, more cognitive overload. It's more frustration, more stress, more burnout. It impacts health. It seems like not a day goes by when I don't hear somebody talking about their lower back pain or their headaches or sleep deprivation. Quality doesn't happen on 4 hours of sleep, unless you're a short sleeper, but that's only 1% to 2% of the population. So I'm going to queue up Laurel to put up a poll, because we want to ask you, when do you do your most important work? Are you able to get your most important work down during normal business hours or weekends, evening? When do you get your most important work? When do you have time to do that? It says I can't vote. During business hours, nobody's on, no one voted on the couch. Because people tell me that that's when they get a lot of work done. So we have about 8% on weekends, about 28% after business hours, 66% during business hours. I guess that's a pretty good sign that the majority of people are getting their work done. Close that out. All right, well, let's talk about how to improve the situation. How can we get our head above water? And so we're going to talk about 3 things to consider when it comes to cognitive overload: how to get started on what to improve, how to improve, and how to quantify those improvements using flow metrics. We're going to look at how to protect your capacity, protect your time, so that you can make investments in improving, investments in future capabilities, and then how to create the conditions where teams can iterate and experiment and continue working towards delivering value. I'm a big fan of using visuals to facilitate conversations. I find that pictures and illustrations greatly enhance discussions. And it gives other people something to look at while you're presenting an idea, or in this case, some metrics. It helps to create a visual language for improving communication. This picture here is of increasing shades of color, and it's combined with dates on the bottom of this chart that are relatively easily received information. You can see that something is going up over the last 2 months, but then the question is, well, what do the colors mean? What's flow load, and what's 121? Is that good or bad? Now, if we just add a legend and a brief explanation, we can communicate some important information. So with the legend at the top, we can see that the color green stands for features, that orange equals defects, yellow equals risks, and purple equals depth. So we're talking about different kinds of work and software delivery here, different kinds of value. And we define flow load here as work in progress. So all the WIP that started but not finished. And we can see that when we first started capturing data, our first data point on October 18th here, we're at 40. We've got 40 work items in progress, partially completed work. And we can see that by November 15th, we had about 130 items total in progress. And by December 13th, we're up to almost 200. So this is over a period of about 2 months. And we see that the arrival rate is faster than the departure rate. Now, that's pretty common when you first start collecting data. And that's why we have this 30-day baseline marker here. So we can see before that, we're just ramping up, we're just collecting data, and things are taking a while to settle in. And so now going forward, we'll see what happens with how much work in progress. Will the rate continue to arrive faster than the departure rate? Now, the average work in progress is 121 here. And when we consider the size of the team, in this case, the team size is 12, then we can see, oh, okay, that's about 10 work items per person on the team. And then you can start to ask questions, right? That's what we're trying to do here, is to enable conversations and discussion about how to improve. So one of the first questions is, for a WIP of 10 per person, does that make sense? Does that make sense in your situation? So this visual succinctly helps others see how much load is on the team, to see that the load is growing and that the team currently isn't able to meet that demand. This is making work visible to enable conversations on what to do about it. When it comes to combating cognitive load, we want to consider how much can fit in our heads and the team's collective heads. As a collective group, how much workload can we take on? Does it make sense for people to have, for everybody on the team to have at least 10 things on their plate at one time? And the answer to that, or the question that people ask is, well, doesn't that depend on size? You know, when it comes to WIP though, I would ask, does size really matter? Like, your mind can only concentrate there, and there is debate about this. For a while, there was the 7 plus or minus 2 theory on what you could keep on your head. And then there's a lot of research that says maybe 3 things you can keep in your head at one time. But much depends on the complexity of that idea. But I would argue that whether it's small or large doesn't really matter, because when it comes to complexity, we can really only hold and work on that one complex idea at a time, right? If you're refactoring your monolith, it's hard to focus on learning Kubernetes at the exact same time, right? Both of those are complicated. So I don't think it really matters how big or small something is when it's complex, because you can truly focus on just one thing at a time. And then when you're done, you move on to the next thing. But I realize that there's other opinions out there on that, but that's my take on it. So getting back to flow load, if we filter on work item type and look at just feature type of work. Now, feature here is a term that I'm using very loosely. It means revenue generation type of work or value generation type of work. These might be epics, they might be stories, they might be features, they might be tasks. These are items that are typically requested from business folks. And when they are delivered to your customer is going to get some kind of value out of them. And so this is showing that as WIP grows, so does wait time. When we started out on October 18th, about 24% of this feature work, it stayed in a wait state versus a work state, an active state. By the time mid-November came around, and we've got over 101 features in our flow load, partially completed work, it climbs to 32%. 33 out of this 101 total in WIP was in a wait state versus 68 being in an active state. And so then this begs the question, well, what are we waiting on? You know, where's the bottlenecks? Is it design? Are we waiting on feedback or some kind of validation? Are we waiting on environments? Are we waiting on funding? You know, maybe we're waiting on CAB approval, change approval board approval. You know, what are we waiting on? It becomes the next question, right? Now, if we filter on work item type and look at debt work, which is purple, debt work, Debt work, if feature work is revenue generation kind of work, then debt work is like fixing technical debt. It's revenue protection kind of work or value protection kind of work. But it's not just tech debt. It's really any improvement that's related to people or process or tools. This training you're in right now, we would consider this debt work because it's an investment in future capability. Right? So here in this chart, debt work starts out at 43% in the beginning on October 18th. And by the time you get to the middle of the month, where we've got 39 items of debt work, more than half of them, 24 of them are in a wait state, and only 15 are in an active state where people are actually working on it. And so debt work, it may sound like a bad thing, but that's not so, because it is an investment to make things better, an investment in future delivery capability. So it's increasing your velocity or improving speed in the future would be considered debt work. And really anything you do to improve your process. So work is in a wait state here, longer than a work state, wait state longer than an active state. So investing in reducing cognitive overload on teams would be considered debt. Experiments are debt. And bringing visibility to this is going to help you spark those conversations where, hey, we've been spending a lot of time doing features and we need to fix our technical debt. Can we allocate some capacity to do that? That's where we're headed here. We know that the amount of flow load shown on the left here, which is your work in progress, directly impacts how long things take and how productive you are. There's a correlation between, and you may know this if you're familiar with Little's law, but there's a correlation between work in progress amounts and your throughput or your flow velocity, and also your speed metrics, how long things take. As we juggle more things at the same time, they take longer. And that's reflected in flow velocity and speed metrics, which is why you see velocity tanking down as flow load increases. And it's why you see speed metrics go up from where they were when we first began. Right. So when flow load, when the demand is out of balance with the team's capacity to meet that demand, then that's an indicator of the need to invest in some improvements to have more debt work. So how much of your WIP flow load is debt? How much do your teams get to allocate capacity to working on improvements? That's the question that flow distribution answers, where debt work is compared to other flow items and made visible. And this is flow distribution here. So the visual of flow velocity, which is your throughput, compared to the flow distribution chart, they're both completed work over the same period of time. And when we look at these today like this, we can see the nature of the team's demands and their priorities. And so this kind of metrics is going to prompt questions like, gee, do you typically have that many defects? So flow distribution on October 18th, we could see that out of the almost 10 items that were delivered on the 18th, over half of them were features and the rest of them were defects. And then as time goes on, we're delivering more features, we're delivering more defects in orange. Yellow here is intended to be risks, mostly compliance or security issues, security breaches, HIPAA compliance audits, that kind of thing. And our purple debt color. And so we wonder, well, what happened on this October 18th release? Was there a security incident that occurred? Is that why now we have yellow happening in every release after the fact? This is a way to start talking about trade-offs, because if you continue to do more defect work, you can't expect that it won't take away from doing feature work. And this is one thing that business and IT leadership need to understand is what are the trade-offs for which work, which type of work gets prioritized. So this view is filtered on just debt to see the actual percentage of the debt work. So I don't have to do math in my head. So this is saying that for debt work, 20% on average is the work that was completed over these last 2 months. So then we would ask, was this the intended strategy? Was it our strategy to have the teams working on technical debt during this time? You know, maybe it's going to help the teams reduce some of the defect work that they're seeing. If the intent is to invest in improvements, then was 20% debt work sufficient enough? Do we need more? Maybe we can start scaling that back a little bit now. So this visual allows those conversations. Otherwise, what would you see? And this is what we see a lot is organizations are just tracking, or they really just have the capability to look at feature work or stories and defects. And so context influences strategy. If everything is just categorized as a feature or a defect, then you're going to get a picture like this. You're not going to see, you know, the security risks, the technical debt. It might be hidden in features or defects somewhere, but there's no visibility on it. So it's harder to have a conversation about what our trade-offs should be for fixing technical debt or working on security items. And so the question is, you know, is this by design? Is it intentional? This quarter, are we holding off on debt for a certain reason? You know, maybe the strategy is to get some big features out. That's what we need to do right now. But this is a reminder to check if we're limiting our organization to be a feature factory, because ultimately there's a need to change your oil in your vehicle every so often, right? So let's go back to looking at flow load for just a moment. The metrics that we looked at with respect to flow distribution and velocity and speed all have to do with completed work. But here's an illustration to show you how you can use WIP limits to allocate capacity for different types of work. And so here we have a WIP limit of 14. That's just, you know, on the left there, we got WIP limit 5 + 5 + 1 + 3. Right? This team we've decided has a capacity of 14. So we'll have a WIP limit of 14. And because that is a way to combat cognitive overload, right, is to set work in progress limits. And in this situation, this scenario, there's just a decision to allocate capacity so that the team could do 1 security risk, they could work on 3 debts, they could have 5 defects in play at one time and 5 features in play. But look what's happening. Only features and defects are getting delivered, right? That's the only, you know, that's the only type of work making it to done. So when features jump the queue like this, it means that the debt work and the risk work is being neglected. That's why I have a little Easter egg over here for thief neglected work. Because it's like you're robbing Peter to pay Paul, right? And it's why features may appear to have a faster flow time than they really do. It's when features jump the queue, or any kind of work jumps the queue, and all of a sudden it shows up in doing. We call that born in doing. But that happens, it's at the expense of the risk and the debt work. As my colleague Carmen Diardo likes to say, like, you have a process. Are you in control of it, or is it in control of you? If there's been an agreement that you can work on some technical debt this quarter, but it never makes it to done because features keep getting prioritized on top of it, then it sounds like things are a bit out of control. So wrapping up this section, regarding flow load and flow distribution. These are key metrics. They enable tough conversations to inspire responsible communication. Calm, respectful, accurate, truthful conversation using visuals to support and improve the language to enhance discussions. And I'm reminded of a quote by Jim Barksdale, CEO of Netscape, who used to say, if we've got data, then let's look at the data. If not, and we're just going with opinions, then let's go with mine. So data brings credibility to your conversations and to get, influencing others and gaining insights to help you reduce or combat your cognitive load. All right, next up. So what prevents you from getting your work done? This is an important question. I ask this all the time as Principal Flow Advisor at Tasktop. I'm trying to learn what prevents teams from getting their work done. It's a good place to start when you're studying bottlenecks in value stream management. And I talk to large enterprise teams almost daily. And what I hear from them is we get interrupted all the time. There's too many meetings, and they're ineffective or inefficient. And it just leads to a lot of conflicting priorities. And clearly, we need to find a better way to protect our time from time theft. And so we're going to look at flow protection time, these interruption busters, and also give some thoughts on organizing to combat cognitive overload. So calendars. So calendar has little blocks in it. It's designed to only hold one event at a time. Like there's only so much room in the calendar, yet they get double booked and they get triple booked. And allowing your calendar to get double booked, it's like overloading your electrical circuit, right? Eventually you might blow a fuse. When you consistently overload yourself and your team, your body starts to send out signals, right? Your shoulder bothers you, or you get a cold, or your autoimmune symptoms start to say hello. A crowded calendar is a pretty effective way to ensure an inefficient and stressful workday for creative people and those doing knowledge work. And I just want to call out, there's actually a book called Death by Meeting by Patrick Lencioni that talks about if you are going to have meetings, here's some way to have some successful meetings. So flow protection time. This is, a lot of people will experiment with flow, what we call flow days. What is a flow day? This is a no meeting day for people to focus with singularity on their most important work, to focus without interruptions, without meetings, without context switching, to get in the flow. Flow, that's what, maybe you've seen this book, Mihai Csikszentmihalyi authored this, and he talks about getting in the zone and to optimize for flow. He calls it the psychology of optimal experience. When we're in the zone, we're able to create and do brilliant work. We lose sense of time, right? And so with flow days, those are days where, the main idea is to not have recurring meetings. If you need to collaborate across different departments, then maybe you could do that. We used to do Flow Thursdays at Tasktop in the past. It does take senior leadership sponsorship to do that, which can happen by building a case for that, by introducing your flow load metrics and showing how they can improve your velocity, improve your flow time if people have less on their plates. If you can't get a whole day of flow days, then how much can you get? Can you get 90 minutes of do not disturb hours to focus uninterrupted? This will need some kind of socialization, but I don't think you're going to get any arguments from practitioners, from the team themselves to try and incorporate flow hours. Some may depend on what time zone you're in. So I'm on the West Coast, and I have flow hours on my calendar in like 3:30 to 5 in the afternoon. I work with a lot of customers on the East Coast. So by the time 3:30 rolls around, they're usually off, getting dinner for the family or whatever. So it's a good time for me to have some uninterrupted time. If you're on the East Coast, then maybe early mornings are the best time for you. If you're in EMEA or in Asia, then and you need to talk to people on the West Coast, that's a real struggle. Acknowledge that. But whatever you can just eke out, find some nuggets of uninterrupted time in order to complete your most important work. There's also a few interruption busters, just real quickly, to try and incorporate a regular cadence of interrupt-free time to focus on. And one is called Pomodoros. And this is where you set a timer. I like to use a little kitchen timer, the kind that has a sound to it, because it helps my brain focus. You set that timer for 25 minutes and you just heads down. So you've paused Slack and you've maybe turned the volume off on your meeting or email notifications, and see what you can get done in 25 minutes. And then you take a break and you repeat that 3, maybe max 4 times, and then you take a longer break. I tried this. That's how I finished my book when I was writing it. I found it to be a powerful way to focus. And maybe because I'm a bit, audio centric, so the sound of the ticking clock was very powerful motivator for me to, even if I couldn't complete a chapter or a paragraph, to at least get to a nice tidy place, a place where it made sense to take a break. Office hours. So these can be used for one-on-ones or for mentoring people or anybody really that you want to invest time in. And these are where you have, you'll see these when outside of your company, if you want to meet with somebody, they'll say, oh, go to this app and pick one of these times, and they'll have times blocked off where you can select a time. And so one way that people who you would like to make time to meet with can put some time on your calendar at your convenience, office hours. Right? So invite people to think about socializing their do not disturb hours or their flow hours or their Pomodoro focus time, to use it as a heads down time. Also, it's kind of a funny note. I have a dog and I need to walk my dog at least once a day. And I try and do that around lunchtime. I'm not the only one that walks the dog, but like I have the lunchtime duty. And so I used to have a block on my calendar at noon that said, eat lunch away from the screen and walk the dog. And that would, get, people would want to put meetings on that every so often. What I found was I just shortened that meeting and I just called it walk the dog. And now people have much more sympathy for the dog going for a walk than they do for me eating lunch away from the screen. So if you have a dog, just that might work for you too. All right. So there's a book out called Team Topologies, authored by Manuel Pais and Matthew Skelton. It's published in 2019. It's about organizing business and technology teams for fast flow, and how the need for software that fits in our heads. And as a team, we need to consider the cognitive load and lighten it. And this quote from them, that software that's too big for our heads works against organizational agility, and the need to limit the size of the software to the cognitive load that the team can handle. And so they're taking a socio-technical approach to evolve teams to product teams so that they'll have less context switching. So it's a systemic approach that considers the people, the tech, the social structures, and roles to enable companies to thrive and survive all the disruption that's happening right now. And Mick Kirsten lays all this out in his book, Project to Product, which was published in 2018, where he's talking about how, projects, they come and go. With projects, people are brought to the work, right? It's like big batch sizes of work that get handed off to other teams to sustain as people run off to do other projects. And that the people are treated like interchangeable resources. And so at the end of the project, the handoffs aren't always as smooth as they could be. Details get lost. Whereas with products, you bring the work to the people who have the expert domain expertise needed to, do it all, right? They build, improve it, and maintain it. So with products, there's less dependencies, there's fewer conflicting priorities, there's less context switching. So fewer of the things that contribute to cognitive overload. The meetings that product team people attend have to do with their domain expertise, which remains with the team, right? Long standing, they have more longevity. Cognitive load increases the more projects, the more domains being worked on. So cognitive load isn't just the number of things being worked on at the same time, but also the complexity of them. And when you manage work by product, those teams can focus on just that product to reduce their cognitive overload. All right, so third up, we're going to talk about some healthy cultural habits to enable improvement, how to create the conditions where a team can iterate and experiment and continue working towards delivering value. And so first off, I think it's important when it comes to experimentation to let teams design their own experiments, set their own goals and their targets. I mean, it's their work. Like they know they have a pretty good idea what's going to help them. So let them own that and run with that, and then share their results with you to see how it goes. And then the guidance is to start small with experimentation, build partnerships, find the coalition of the willing, right? So you would partner with other teams in areas where maybe there's a mutual benefit of being able to improve your flow time or your velocity, benefits of running an experiment to see if you can go faster. One way you can do this is ask your internal customers what they would like to see improve. I mean, maybe they'd be willing to sponsor your experiment, and that can help create stories that are going to build the case so that you can make larger changes to amplify the benefits across the whole organization down the road as the experiments can become larger and larger. And maybe you get to the point where you're doing an experiment on incremental funding of experiments. Wouldn't that be a cool idea? We want to create conditions of focus. So we need to address this web of interdependencies between different teams, right? How do we reduce the external constraints on a team doing experimentations with respect to different priorities from other teams? Team A's priority isn't Team B's priority. And then bring forward the measurement of business. What does doing your goal and your experiment do for the business? How does going faster or being more effective, how does that help you? How does that help the business deliver value safer, sooner, happier? And that's going to help you get business buy-in for your experiment, is using the language of the business, because those are the folks who are setting priorities in many cases. Next up is ensure that the teams themselves have visibility into the value that they're delivering and that they can actually test the outcomes of their hypothesis in their experiments. So I'm a big fan of using a one-page format for a lot of things, whether that's a view of a product roadmap or a team's Kanban, but especially experiments. And I think it's for the same reason that Taiichi Ono rejected long documentation. Toyota people would bring him these really long documents, and he just wanted to see the gist of it. You know, and when you have to squeeze a bunch of information into a one pager, it requires a lot of thought to get just the essential, just the relevant information written in a clear, concise, to the point manner. And there's just something refreshing about getting to the point quickly, right? Being able to read it in 5 minutes. So this is an example of a one pager for experimentation that I've used. It probably to many of you looks like, hey, that's an A3. And yeah, it does look a lot like an A3. You know, some of the things, like you won't see a target condition in here, but you do see a current state. But I mean, basically it has all the essentials, right? What is the problem? Why is that a problem? What's the goal? You know, what outcomes do we need to occur? You know, what is the current state? Where do things stand now? What are the activities? What are you going to do? How are you going to measure those? And what's the definition of done? Because these things need to be time boxed. And if you're going to start small, then maybe 4 to 6 weeks initially. So it's great to have a definition of done there on your experiment. Now, it's common for people to sort of fall into a state of analysis paralysis. Like, what if I'm not 100% certain of the outcome of this experiment? And for that, a quote from John Cutler saying that, remember, you know, 100% certainty isn't the goal. It's rarely achievable. So what is the smallest experiment you could run that might actually reduce uncertainty? It comes back to starting small when it comes to experimentation. Now, every conference talk that I've attended lately touches, just about every talk, almost every plenary talk, touches on the need for psychological safety, that experiments and continuous improvement really require a level of psychological safety, because experiments by their very nature are prone to failure. And the idea is that the failure will lead to further discussions, you know, further curiosity, to inquiry, to point you in the right direction. To influence change through experimentation, a culture of curiosity is needed. And so what kind of culture does your organization have? This is the Westrom typology of organizational culture, and you can use it as a way to measure cultural readiness for experimentation. Like, do messengers get shot, or are they just neglected, or do they actually get trained? Right? What about failure? Does failure lead to scapegoating, or does it lead to justice, or does it lead to inquiry? Right? And so with that, I want to ask you that question. What kind of culture does your organization have? And so we're going to ask Laurel to cue up that poll. So pathological, basically a fear-driven organization, right? Bureaucratic, one that's run by rules. So that's like a lot of federal government stuff. And then generative. This is the realm of high-performing teams who do a lot of experimentation. Or we'll see a mix of A and B. Where does your organization fit in here? Oh, bureaucratic. Generative, oh, that's cool. Mix of A and B, 31%. I'm gonna like take a screenshot of this. Not sure, but I'm always the last to hear, 4%. Yeah. Okay. And so let's talk about how to improve that situation. So there's a 2-year study on team performance. This is the one by Google, the Aristotle report that came out talking about that the highest performing teams have one thing in common, and that is psychological safety. And psychological safety, we're defining that is where humans feel safe to ask, well, my definition, to ask stupid questions, right? So it's a safe learning environment. Like I feel safe, I can ask questions. People feel safe to contribute, and they feel safe to challenge others' ideas without fear of being ridiculed or yelled at or punished in some way. As Paul Santagata says, there's no team without trust. And as Jez Humble says, it's, from the studies based at Google, that psychological safety, it predicts performance. It predicts software delivery performance and organizational performance. So a quote here from Edwards Deming: wherever there is fear, you will get wrong figures. And we see this all the time. They tell me how you're going to measure me, and I'll tell you how I'm going to behave. Right? If you're going to measure me in an illogical fashion, then don't expect me to behave. Don't expect people to behave logically. So psychological safety is what allows people to speak their mind, to be creative, to stick their neck out without fear. These are the types of behaviors that lead to innovation and market breakthroughs. This is what we need our organizations to be in a position to do during this age of disruption. So here's a measure for you. I call it flow safety. It's a measure of trust. And it just includes, you could add these kinds of questions onto your survey when maybe you survey or you tack it onto your team's happiness surveys. Is leadership open to hearing bad news? Right? Do people trust one another? Are failures considered learning opportunities where people aren't ridiculed? Are people react to that with inquiry? And what's the situation with blame on your team? Very interesting questions to consider your level of trust on your team. So I wanted to just kind of close up by saying that when it comes to reducing cognitive load, that it not only helps the business deliver more value, it also helps teams become more healthier. It helps people become more healthier. Like, you can have both. It's a win-win situation here, right? Increase business value and your health. Just to end up here, I would say some takeaways for you. Protect your flow time, your flow hours ferociously. Because if you don't say no when you need to say no, your body will say it for you in the form of stress or burnout or disease. Yeah. And then address psychological safety, because it's the best indicator there is of high performing organizations and teams. Find the coalition of the willing so you can partner with people, and then use flow metrics to influence change. Somebody is going to influence your leadership. Let it be you, right? And keep in mind that the experimentations need psychological safety to be in place, and to start small with those. And then gradually over time, you can build those experiments up to the point where they can occur cross departments. Like, everything doesn't have to be in your team's control in order to experiment down the road. And with that, I think it's time to open up the floor for some Q&A.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dominica. And just to let everyone know that if we don't get to your question now, we will make sure we follow up after. So our first question we have is, how do we know and measure overloading for your yourself or others?
How do we know in measuring overloading? So first off, I would look at flow load to answer the question of balance. Is the team meeting the demand? Is there more demand than the team's capacity to meet that demand? That's kind of an easy one. What is all the partially completed work in progress? And how many months left of that do we have to go through? Right. Next up is when a lot of people seem to show signs of health issues. I'm exhausted. The signals of burnout include exhaustion and loss of self-confidence. And so if you had somebody on your team, they used to be very confident, and now they're not doing well, their shoulder hurts or lower back pain, or they always seem to be getting ill. And you can sense a difference with them, like they just don't have as much confidence as they used to have. That's an indicator of burnout. And there's a lot of subtleties all in between both of those. But another measure would be how many projects are people having to support? How many different domains, different projects do people have to support? Because you can only hold so many things in your head at one time. If there's a lot of complexity there and people are running from meeting to meeting and having to context switch every time they join a new session, I think that's an indicator too.
Thank you. The next question we have is, I'm sold on the concept of waste and wait time, but trying to measure and track this in a Jira environment is very difficult. Do you have any success stories on how to do that?
Yeah, I hear you there. What we've found is to try and find ways to get your Jira admin to add fields in Jira for debt work and risk work, so that it's not just all feature stories or defects. And then the Jira data can then be aligned to those 4 different types of work, so you can get the flow metrics out of that. So I'd love to dig in more to hear your specifics on Jira problems, but that's usually what we run into, is because they don't really have enough fields that can be used for those purposes. The quick fix is some teams use labels to do that, but that can be problematic too. So I would work at making sure that you have fields there specifically for that you can show the wait states, because that's often what's missing. So wait state. So what are you waiting on, right? That first question with flow load. Why are things taking so long? What are we waiting on? Are we waiting on funding? Are we waiting on approvals? Are we waiting on design? Are we waiting on test? How do we see work that's in that state? Because Jira has a blocked state. Okay, I mean, it's a little helpful, but where is it blocked? Like, I want to know what state the work is blocked in, because that's going to give us a clue where the bottleneck is that we need to go try and reduce. Because it doesn't matter how fast one part of the value stream is flowing if you're not optimizing the bottleneck.
Thank you. And I'm going to actually combine 2 questions into one, just for time's sake, which is, combined, using your workflow management tool, how are you identifying wait time? And then following on that, how is wait defined different from your backlog?
Wait time. How are we defining wait time? That's a great question. I define wait time as work that is in a wait state, that it is not in an active state. So it's once work has been approved, we made a decision, yes, we're going to do this thing. And then it goes into these different states as work flows across the value stream. So how often is it that that work is in a wait state? Right? You're adding that up, so that'll get you your wait state. So what was the second part of that?
The second part was, how is wait defined different from backlog?
Backlog is typically not approved yet, or it's not prioritized yet, where once work enters your WIP, your work in progress, we'd like to, it's past the line of commitment. We've committed to do this work. We've got our funding, it's approved, and now let's do it, right? Where the backlog is, wait a minute, this hasn't been approved yet, it's not prioritized yet. There's a line of commitment in between those two states.
Awesome. And I do want to wrap up now. Just a reminder, if we didn't get to your questions, we will make sure we follow up. Dominica, if you want to go to the next couple slides.
Yeah. And so just to let you know, we can continue this conversation. Tasktop has a Flow Academy, and there's a lot of on-demand courses that you can take. And then we do interactive workshops. I do a lot of custom flow workshops with organizations to help people make their work visible and map out their value streams. And then thirdly, these executive roundtables that we do where leadership, our execs get together, they host these confidential and interactive roundtables with other executives, maybe 10, 12 people attend those at a time for some exclusive discussion. And then also on Thursday, we're having Ask Me Anything. Mick, Carmen, and I are participating in that Thursday at noon Eastern time. So if you have some more follow-on questions, and we'll have some other experts and authors on the call to help answer your questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dominica. And thank you for everyone for joining us today. We hope you can join us on Thursday at the Ask Me Anything, but otherwise have a great rest of your week and a happy holiday.
Bye.